In this video, I'm going to talk about tracing the commercial pattern onto brown paper and then the steps to grade up or grade down the pattern to customize it to your size. In this costume shop, I like to keep the commercial pattern intact because it has all of the different sizes printed all on the same piece of paper. I find that if you start cutting away the white commercial pattern, you end up with these little bits that are on the side, and they're fairly fussy and really annoying to have to keep track of. So I like to simply pin the commercial pattern to a piece of brown paper, and with the ponce wheel, the one with the pokey spikes on it, carefully trace off onto the paper underneath all of the marks to transfer the pattern onto the brown paper. To begin, you'll want to iron the white commercial pattern with a dry iron. If you steam it, the moisture will wrinkle the pattern. So you want to get most of the large creases out of it so you can push pin this down and then proceed with the tracing. The main difference between commercial patterns and then the brown pattern that we will produce is that on commercial patterns they have the seam allowance on the paper pattern. In theater, we create our patterns to not have the seam allowance at the edge of the pattern. That's helpful in a later step that we call truing, and we also like to have different sizes of seam allowance. Commercial patterns have a standard 1/2 inch or 5/8 inch all the way around. For alterability in theater, we like to have different size seam allowance, and so we introduce those seam allowances when we're in the cutting phase. So the critical point with that is to be sure to trace off on the stitching line, not on the cutting line. As you are tracing off, be sure to trace all of the notches, the grain line all the way down, notches, center lines. It is industry standard that on the back of the sleeve cap is 2 notches, and on the front we have 1 notch. So make sure to transfer those as well. And then down below I've traced around the cuff. Once you've traced that off, you can remove it, and I have darkened the lines here so the camera will pick it up. You don't need to trace this at this point because you'll be able to see the ponce wheel marks. They do make a hole, dotted line in the brown paper, which you can see. I've just darkened it so that the camera can see it. When you're tracing, you don't have to have a heavy hand, you just have to mark well enough through the white commercial pattern to transfer the line to the brown paper. And then, if you have wobbled on these long straight lines with pencil, you can run the ruler and pencil along that and produce a nice straight line. You can also use your ruler, because it has this beautiful corner here, to make sure that your corners here in the armpit and then down here are beautiful 90-degree angles. We want those to be 90-degree angles. Using the ruler is especially critical. I can see my tracing on the cuff, which is essentially a rectangle. My tracing is a little wobbly on this line, so I'm going to just mark that in so that you can see. Here is the grain line. It is industry standard. The grain line has arrows at the end. That will tell us how to place it on the fabric when we get to the cutting of the shirt. In theater, we like to leave a roadmap for ourselves, so I've labeled this the sleeve pattern. This is my name because there are 20 of us in class, and my sleeve will look oddly like everyone else's. So SS is the indication for side seam. This is the side seam that gets stitched together to make the sleeve. I like to note where the shoulder is. This is a notch that will intersect into the yoke. The back notch is indicated by the double notch, as I said before. Front notch is the single notch. So you would proceed in the same manner with all the other pieces. I like to place my pattern pieces on the brown paper in a logical manner. Right now you can see they're overlapping, but here is the yoke piece that I'm interested in. It's the medium, and so I've traced around that and have darkened the lines so the camera can pick it up. It's the yoke. I've labeled the piece. It's Laurie's piece, and I've darkened the grain line with the 2 arrows, marked where center back is, the shoulder point here and here, and transferred the other notches. So I like to place the patterns on the brown paper in a logical fashion, meaning if this is the back, this is the yoke, I would then want to place the shirt back here, tracing that off and all around, so that when we get to the grading up or grading down, the term grading means is referring to adding by increments or gradations. So the verb that we use in this industry is grading it up. If we were to want to customize this yoke and this back by making it a little bit bigger, we would want to add the same amount to the back as we are adding to the yoke. And I like to place the pattern pieces close to each other this way, in the same relationship that they will be in when we start stitching the shirt together. That way it makes it easier to remember that, oh yes, I've added a little bit to the yoke, and remember to add some to the shirt as well, so that we are consistent in our grading up the shirt. Similarly, here is the shirt front. When you're placing the pieces next to each other, do leave a little bit of space at places like the side seam. If you are wanting to enlarge this, then you could simply add some, draw in your new side seam, add a little to this side, draw in your new side seam, and then again you've remembered to add to this side and this side, because these are going to be stitched together in the final product, and by leaving some room between them, here's about 4 inches, you've allowed yourself to do that. Again, I'm doing this in marker. You'll be doing all of this in pencil. And for consistency's sake here, if you're adding to the yoke this way, what you're doing then is elongating this yoke seam that gets stitched to the yoke seam on the front. And so you're going to need to remember to add this same amount to your front and tapering it down perhaps, so that the front of this is the same seam line length as this. So to check to see if you do need to add to the total circumference of the chest, you measure from the side seam to the center back, and from the center front to the other side seam. And for easy math, you can simply double that, and you come up with 56 inches around the circumference. This is one of those pattern pieces, actually there's 2 of those pattern pieces again. This is placed on a fold when we cut the fabric, so this measurement twice is the width of the full back, and this measurement twice is the measurement of the full front, and together they come up to 56 inches, which is plenty of ease. So you wouldn't actually, to fit this mannequin, you wouldn't actually need to add any at the side seam. So here is the back of the actual shirt, And here is the shirt yoke, and then there's the armscye. And you can see here are some gathers, maybe some tucks that we want to have so that we have some ease across the back. And that is why when you line up the armscye of the shirt back with the armscye of the yoke, the back, center back of the shirt extends past the center back of the yoke. This is the amount of extra ease. So here's a notch and here's a notch. This back would be stitched to the yoke smoothly from the armscye to the notch, and then this fullness you would arrange in gathers or tucks across the back. If you're wanting a little more room, if for some reason, the yoke fits nicely, but you're wanting a little more room in the body, you can add more here all the way down and have a little more ease or gathers or tucks, or you could divide that, adding a little more at center back and a little more at the side seam. There are several ways to add circumference to the shirt if you want it. To check the sleeve length, you need to consider the length of the sleeve in connection to the cuff. Don't forget to include the cuff when you're seeing if this is going to be long enough for your arm. You'll want about 1.5 inches or 2 inches of extra length in the sleeve for ease, extra length for when you bend your arm, and you'll want your cuff to stay right at your wrist. The height of this cuff is 2¼ inches. So start measuring the bottom of the sleeve at the 2¼ inches mark and measure up to the armscye. This is 24½ so the pattern itself is 24½. In looking at our measurement chart, the total goal for the sleeve is 25, and that includes this ease column. So the pattern as we traced it off is 24½. We want 25. You could say, oh, that's probably going to be enough, or you could add some that 1/2 inch down here all the way across to achieve your total goal. It can be tricky to true or measure a curved edge. This one isn't terribly curved, but it's very helpful to turn your tape measure up on its thin edge, and then it can bend and you can move it around the curve much easier this way than if you were trying to pivot and do it flat. So that's really handy when you're measuring curves. So next we need to measure the sleeve cap, this upper curved edge of the sleeve, to see if it will measure the same or slightly larger than the armhole of the body that it's going to go into. So this measures 21½. So let's pretend that I didn't add this at the side seam and I didn't add this. We're going to be working with the original line here to see if the sleeve cap, will fit into this. So we just measured the sleeve cap. Now we need to measure the complete armhole of the shirt back and front, not forgetting to measure the yoke as well, because that is the piece that completes the armhole here. So to measure the armhole, again, turn your tape on its side, put your thumbnail where that measure ends, jump over, measure the armhole on the back, thumbnail where that is, jump over, and measure the yoke. And that measurement comes up to be 21. So that means this is 1/2 inch smaller than the sleeve measures, which is just right. That's a good amount of ease for a nicely set-in sleeve for this shirt. So here on the shirt, we have the shirt front, the bib, and then the placket underneath and the placket on top. These all need to be patterned so that they go together precisely. And you'll notice that the shirt front down here folds over and makes a tuck, so to give some ease down there. So we need to pattern the placket, the bib, and the shirt front. So let's look at that in the paper pattern. So here's the pattern for the shirt front, and that's the extra piece for that tuck that happens right at center front. This is the bib, and I've made a copy and cut this out because the bib gets stitched onto the shirt front. So the length here needs to match, and the neck needs to match, and the shoulder. So this bib is not quite perfect, so we would need to adjust that to make sure that it perfectly mirrors the shape of the front underneath. Now, this is a proportion you'll need to consider on you. If this bib is too long or too short, or if it's too narrow, it needs to be wider. This bib shape will be different if you're a 5'2", 110-pound person, or if you're a 6'4", 250-pound person. You'll want to size proportion this bib to suit the person that you're making the shirt for. Now the next piece is the placket. You'll remember in the shirt that I just showed you, we had the shirt front, the bib, and then the placket here. And the end of the placket sits underneath. There's a whole construction thing that we'll talk about later. But this needs to be a continuation of this neck. So that takes me into the neck and the collar. So here's the back yoke that I've cut out and push pinned next to the shirt front, because this is the shoulder seam that will be stitched together when we get to that point. And here is the neck edge and a continuation of the neck onto the front. This bib piece is going to be stitched on there. Doesn't really impact the neck measurement, but I thought I'd put it on there to remind you. And then the center front placket will be stitched there. And so this is what you need to consider when you are measuring for the neck, to see if this neck edge is going to, the edge of the pattern that is going to fit around your neck. Now you'll remember the buttonholes and buttons are on the center of this placket. And so to measure this neck, you wouldn't measure to the edge, you would measure to the center, which, remember, on the collar and the placket in the shirt, the center of this placket is where that button is stitched and where that edge of the buttonhole sits. So you wouldn't be measuring to the edge of the placket, you'd be measuring to the center of that. This is true center front. So here is the collar band, and we will be measuring to see if it fits, and we will be measuring from true center front here, around the bottom edge to here, which is parallel to where the button would be sewn on.